All right, so let's pivot a little bit from cybersecurity to personal security and kind of misinformation and fraud and all this kind of stuff. There's a story I read on LinkedIn. It's from a guy called Joe DeWolf. He's the founder of a company called Novel. I have no idea if the story is true or not. There's no way to prove it, but I think it's a good little bedtime story, if nothing else, to riff on an idea that I think is going to become a real thing. He was saying he's at dinner with a CEO, and the CEO's lawyer calls him with horrific news. He says this is a true story. The lawyer says that a new employee claims to have had several Zoom meetings with the CEO, and he's been demanding inappropriate things of this new employee, and she has audio recordings to prove it. So, it's basically a HR sexual harassment Me Too claim against the CEO. And the CEO goes, nope, that's impossible. Never happened. He's like, no fucking way. That I did not do that. And the lawyer's like, I'm going to send you the recordings that she's sent. This guy says it in a kind of funny way. He's like, guess what happens next? Was the CEO lying? Was he telling the truth, but it was some impersonator? Or was he telling the truth and it was an AI bot? Turns out, you guessed it, an employee likely, had been Zooming this new employee, this kind of naive employee who didn't know the company very well yet, and spoofing the CEO with AI voice duplication, probably maybe some video duplication, and had been having 20-minute long video chats with her, basically trying to get her, harassing her. And now they're trying to figure out who the hell was doing this, using AI to spoof the CEO and basically do inappropriate things. Now, again, I don't know if this story is true. I don't know who the CEO is. You can't read everything you read on the internet. You can't believe everything you read on the internet. But this is going to happen more, right? We've heard that story about someone called and they're saying that their kid was in trouble and they needed to do something. You start to hear about these little AI spoofing things. Kind of just, I guess, as a cultural question, as a personal security question, as a tech question, Mike, do you think this stuff is a little overplayed or overstated, or?
I think it's become a major issue. So it's funny. I'm not really funny, but last year, my son's high school was swatted in that, like, there was a recording made stating that it was through a series of schools in Colorado where at the same time, the schools all received this threat call that there was a shooter on campus and it was supposedly a credible threat and they could hear gunshots in the background. And multiple cities kind of went on lockdown and multiple schools were evacuated, only to determine that it was a foreign actor calling from outside the US to a local police department, to a local school, playing a AI or falsified recording that essentially shut down these towns and had all these schools evacuated and disrupted the lives of many and created trauma within these students, right? And that was, a year or two ago, right? To think now the level of disruption you could do through AI, whether it's through voice cloning, images, video, I mean, it's actually pretty unbelievable. Realistically, you and I could be honestly AI agents at this point. The quality levels there, our AIs can be talking to each other. We are real humans, right?
Wait, Mike, did you really show up to this podcast?
Okay, yeah, I did this time. Yes.
You're so lame, man.
But the reality is, like, it doesn't have to be, right? Like, this could be not me, right? This could be AI me. It would not have been hard to do. And so, yes, there's the like, oh my God, what if somebody wants to single you out and create a recording and they want to do something terrible to you or catfish you, or they want to like gaslight you, or they want to do something to your reputation? Obviously not hard to do. But the second piece is, what if you want to shut down the school? What if you want to shut down the city? What if you want to call in fake reports? And then also, what happens to the police? What happens to our overall infrastructure if they can't determine what's real and what's fake, right? And I would argue we're very vulnerable. So, what we saw within Colorado when this happened is that the police stations that got the calls, or the schools, were unable to determine where the call was coming from. They eventually found it was from a foreign caller, but it's not like they had an ID. They'll go, this is a verified call with a verified problem. And if they had seen that this was coming from outside the country, maybe they wouldn't have actually responded or shut the schools down. But it was really easy, and we were very vulnerable to that moment where this happened, right? And it was really, really terrible. And so I think we're about to step into this world where we're not going to know what's real or fake. I think it's going to be all over social media. I think it's a huge vulnerability because we're all essentially looking at the same newspaper every morning. We're looking at the same social feeds. We're seeing the same videos, which means we have concentrated attention into one place. And if something goes big, we all see it at the same time, and there's no independent reporters, those independent news agencies
Mhm.
verifying the authenticity of this. We're consuming the stuff in real time. We're all consuming it the same, which means we're all impacted the same in real time, and it can be extremely disruptive, right? And so you go back to like the original like Alien broadcast on radio. Was that what George? Was that George Orwell that did that? Right? Like the old like they did like a fake radio broadcast of like
Oh, this
aliens.
is the War of the Worlds. Scared the hell out of everybody. They thought it was real.
So that's where we're at, right? Like we have a concentrated consumption within social platforms. We're not having any validation of what you're posting that it's real or not, and it's really easy basically to create these synthetic videos. So I think we're about to see waves and waves of this. It's gonna be really interesting to see what happens.
The real-time destruction of like disrupting the classroom, hurting the kids with that story you just told, the potential lawsuit against the CEO who was innocent, that is kind of localized destruction, distraction that is very painful and very real. But as you pointed to, I, as a systems thinker, as a long-term thinker, I'm much more concerned about the long-term destruction of society because nothing can be depended on to be real anymore. We no longer have shared priors, shared mental models, shared fundamental truth. And like democracy and society is like rests on trust. It fundamentally rests on basic social contracts and the ability to trust some basic common truths. It's unraveling more and more and more quickly. You know, you and I both we met in the social apps era, building social tools, right? You were doing what was it called?
User plane, it was like real time chat, instant messaging, presence services, streaming, music streaming, all through. It was all real time. Like everything was based on real time.
You and I had very similar view of the world and sort of similar adjacent businesses and products. So I had a thing called Echo, which is also real-time social engagement widgets, and you were building real-time social engagements. There was sort of like they were a different suite mostly, and they kind of fit together very nicely. And I don't know if I don't want to speak for you, but I believed social media and social tools would democratize authenticity and sharing and telling our true stories. And in the end, it really democratized and mainstream trolling and misinformation, and created sort of these filter bubbles.
There was a beauty to building community, right? Like, and having everybody connect because the websites at that point were so isolating. It was just you and a computer. And suddenly, when you went to these websites, you could actually meet other people and have these interactions with other people. I don't think what we assumed, though, at the time was that these millions and millions of individual communities would kind of synthesize or kind of aggregate into a single community, which is a Facebook feed, a TikTok feed, a Instagram feed. And so suddenly there's all this power given because once everybody's consuming the same piece of media at the exact same place, you really don't get a diversification of trust or voice. You have a singular platform, which again creates a really, really easy attack surface if you want to manipulate people. Right. So I think, yeah, in a world where there was millions of individual communities, everyone was kind of verifying within their own community settings, we lost that when we moved to kind of a consolidated consumption model.
I would say it slightly differently. I would say the problem is that there are, and it's funny, one of the taglines I had was for audiences of one. I would say actually we fragmented into, while we're all looking at the same feed, we're all consuming different worldviews that just feed our reptilian brain what we want to hear. So one feed, millions or thousands of different bubbles. Actually,
Right.
mostly two, right? Like left and right. And so it's. I don't think the problem is a consolidation of consumption, rather a fragmentation of consumption. But what I do think has happened is that there's been a collapse in again trust and accountability. So we're just all anonymous people yelling at each other. So when you go from small communities, you have some kind of reputational risk, strong ties. But when you're in this large community, the feed is splitting you apart in terms of your worldview, and then the trust levels are low, and the ties are weak.
Right. You're talking about the echo chamber thesis of like, yeah, I step into the Facebook feed, but I'm just hearing things that already support my
Yeah.
predispositions, my feelings. I just feel like more from a how do you disrupt society perspective.
Yes. Yeah.
It's pretty easy to disrupt society. What I also wonder is like for the CEO that was called out for, falsified data with malicious whatever behavior that was all fake. There's almost no way for them to go back and retract that. right? It's kind of like when you read the article in the newspaper and they realize there was something wrong and they write like a retraction the next day. But then you think to yourself, well, 100,000 people have probably read the article and only 3,000 people saw the retraction. So therefore you have 97,000 people that basically have been infected by this bad view. So I think to myself, the moment that you do reputational damage to somebody, that trauma sits there. And even if you go back and say, oh, it was all fake, it's never going to reach the entire population, which means that you're always polluting somebody with some poison and you can't really put the genie back in the bottle, right? And that's really sad.
That's so interesting. I've been working on a tool, just tinkering with it on the side, that helps you consume news media with more context. It kind of reveals the biases and logical fallacies and makes counter arguments for you as you're reading a political story. It would be really cool if it tracks the stories you've read and keeps an eye out for a month or two afterwards to see if the story gets retracted or falsified, and then like sends you an update like, hey, by the way, that article you read 17 days ago is no longer true. That would be pretty cool. Yeah, we should look into that.
But we have to assume this is just the beginning of this, right? Like
Yeah.
this is going to be so bad. At some point, I assume that whether it's Google interface or an iOS layer is going to have a visual indicator of whether you're talking human or not, verified information, non-verified information, a kind of an overlay on top of everything you consume digitally. Otherwise, you're really just not going to know.
Yeah, so I talked earlier about all of the business opportunities that get created by all of the problems that get created by AI. We talked about, information security, cloud security, all this other stuff. One of them is going to be verifying the humanity of the person on the other line, like a live, present human, basically presence detection. And the other is going to be verifying provenance, right? What was used to create this content, and what was the chain of custody, and not was it generated by AI, because everything will be touched by AI. Every photo you take on the iPhone is touched by AI. There's an AI computational stack involved. But like, what is that chain of provenance? There's going to need to be some open source, open standard, open consensus created around this. But boy, oh boy, we all know how hard those things are to make. So
I agree with that.
yeah.
I always thought that's like AI. Eventually, I'd be able to select an answer, and it would show me the kind of architecture of how it got to that answer. I assume they're not revealing that because they don't want to reveal the sources that they've consumed to train the AI, because it maybe opens it up for copyright dispute or patent dispute.
My understanding is, and I'm not an expert on this, but my understanding is they actually don't know how it fucking works. They don't know how it encodes information into the weights. My understanding is that they just don't know. And so there is no observability of these systems. They're very, very hard to observe and to provide traceability. Now, I'd love for people in the comments to tell me I'm wrong. I'm sure maybe there's some new research about that, but that's the last I heard.